What do name tags have to do with the great I am? It's time to get descriptive on this episode of the Midweek Peek. Welcome to another episode of the Midweek Peek, a series dedicated to refreshing our minds and renewing our walks with God. I am your host, Jason Campbell. I am a preacher by trade, but in reality, I'm a huge introvert. This may come as a shock to you, but then again, you might be surprised how many preachers in real life are introverts. Being an introvert doesn't mean we don't like people. It just means that our social tanks can empty after a while when surrounded by a large crowd. Whereas extroverts, their social tanks are filled right up. So when it comes to meeting new people, it can be a little stressful for an introvert. And that's why I've liked the classic, hello, my name is name tag. I know these can seem a little tacky, but it really helps get a conversation going. But names can only go so far. I'd prefer if everyone, when they write down their name, it'd just be so much better if they also wrote down a hobby or their job, something that can really generate a conversation. After all, that's why we wear these in the first place, is we want other people to know who we are. But what does a name tag have to do with our lesson from last Sunday of what it means to be the great I am? Time for a refresh. Last Sunday, we continued exploring the identity of Jesus by seeing how he described himself in the scriptures. It's incredible to think that 2,000 years later, people still aren't sure who Jesus is. So we connected Exodus chapter 3, a very famous passage, with John chapter 8, verse 58, and then looked at the 7 I am statements in the Gospel of John. Our first point was, I am who I am. In Exodus chapter 3, we read about a man who's in exile, a runaway, an outcast. Moses is tending to the flock when he notices something really peculiar. It's a bush that's on fire, but it's not burning up. And as he goes to further investigate, he hears the voice of the angel of the Lord say, stop, do not come any closer, remove your sandals from your feet. This is holy ground. And the next several verses, God explains that he has heard the anguish, the suffering of his people, and he wants to take them out of bondage into a land flowing with milk and honey. That means a very fertile, bountiful land, a paradise. And he says, Moses, I have chosen you to be the leader. And Moses is like, you sure there's no one else? He starts giving excuse after excuse, trying to tell God, I'm not the guy, and God just continues to dismantle every excuse. Moses begins by saying, who am I? Who am I that I could ever go to Pharaoh and make this demand, make this request? And to put it frank, God says, it doesn't matter who you are, because I'm going to be with you. And then that turns Moses' attention to another excuse, another question. Well, when my people ask about your name, what name shall I give them? In other words, who are you? Earlier, God had indicated he was the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but Moses is asking for something more personal, for God's name. And God says in Exodus 3:14, Ayer, Asher, Aye. In other words, I am who I am. This is God's personal covenant name, Yahweh. Yahweh is from a Hebrew verb which means to be or to become. There are some variations on how you could translate Exodus 3:14, but one of my favorites is, I am the one who is. I am he. And this is what God is trying to reveal to Moses. He doesn't just give Moses a name, he gives Moses a theology. That God is self-existent, that God is eternal, that God is self-sufficient. There is no one like him. God doesn't belong in a hierarchy of other gods or a pantheon. No, God is in his own class. In Revelation 21:6, we read God saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Alpha is the beginning of the Greek alphabet, and Omega is the last letter in the Greek alphabet. So God's saying, I'm the beginning and the end, A to Z. Our second point carries us 1,500 years from the time of Moses into the time of Christ. Since this time, God's name has become so revered, the Jews wouldn't write it down. Instead, they would write Adonai, which means Lord, or Hashem, which means the name. They didn't want to take God's name in vain. Jesus, at the end of the Feast of the Tabernacles, declared, "I am the light of the world." This led to a rather heated discussion with some of the Jews who heard him speak. And at one point they said, "You must have a demon in you," because Jesus was making himself greater than Abraham. And finally, Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am." Now, John records these words in Greek, but when you look at the Greek phrase, "I am," it's the same phrase that's used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. Ego, eimi, I am. There are skeptics that say Jesus never declared himself to be God, but you can't get plainer than this. And if you don't believe me, look at the reaction of the Jews when they heard him say these words. In John 8:59, they picked up stones to kill him because they believed he had blasphemed. Jesus had done what no person, no God-fearing Jew would ever dare to do, and that is take God's covenant name upon himself. There are several other times when Jesus uses the expression, "I am." But in the Gospel of John, we find 7 distinct statements, the "I am" statements, that Jesus shares with the world, the way he describes himself to those around him. It's important for us to recognize what these "I am" statements are, because each statement assumes a problem, and each statement offers the solution to that problem. See, the great "I am" statements are an invitation to draw closer to Jesus because he alone can provide what we need. Each of us have longings in our heart. We desire, we crave to be satisfied, but we look around and the world only disappoints. And then Jesus says, "I am the bread of life," that he alone can satisfy the deepest longings of the heart. We see that in this world there are many philosophies, many religions, many ways of thinking that we can become really confused. And we ask ourselves, what is truth? And then Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." You can have that light in your life today. You can know that truth today. Speaking of darkness and confusion, this world is full of violence, full of death. And we think to ourselves, can I keep my family safe? Do you ever lie awake at night and wonder, how is my family going to stay safe after I'm gone? And then we read in John chapter 10, Jesus saying, "I am the door, that anyone who comes through me can go in and out and find pasture, that you can find that rest." It harkens us back to Psalm 23, where the Lord, being David's shepherd, guides him to a place of green pasture and still waters. And then, of course, we think about that question of who cares for me? Does anyone notice me? Is anyone going to notice me when I'm gone? Does anyone really love me? And Jesus says, "I love you. I'm the good shepherd. I care for my sheep. I know them and they know me. Yes, the thief, he's come to steal and kill and destroy, but I came that you may have life. I lay down my life for my sheep." You consider the scene at Lazarus' tomb. Death seems to surround us and suffocate us. And we ask that question that Job asked, if a man dies, shall he live again? And Jesus responds in John chapter 11, "I am the resurrection and the life." See, these first 5 "I am" statements reveal so much to us about Jesus and invite us to know him because, again, he alone can provide for us. He alone can satisfy those deep longings of the heart. But he also reveals to us the consequence of not following him. He's not going to force us to love him, but he wants us to understand there are no alternatives than following him. That's why we read in John chapter 14, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." It's as plain as day. We may struggle with the implications of the statement, but we can certainly understand what Jesus is saying. Just like we read in John chapter 15, Jesus reveals to his disciples, I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from Jesus, we can do nothing. But if we are abiding in him, if we are connected to him and following him, we will bear much fruit. And John later reveals in 1 John 2 that if we abide in him, we will receive that precious gift, eternal life. And that's something you want today. Now that we've refreshed our minds, let's renew our walk with God. We've really lost the sense of meaning behind names, haven't we? At least in our culture today in America. You know, if I asked you the question, why were you named the name that you have? Would you know the reason? Often we're named after family members or honestly our characters from our favorite TV shows or movies. I know that there are a lot of kids growing up with the name Drogo or Katniss, but back in the days of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, your name was a crucial part of your identity. It often represented the character of a person, or it was given to a person by a prophet to represent God's relationship with his people. I want you to consider Abram. You know, we see Abram's name change in Genesis chapter 17. He goes from being called Abram, which means exalted father, to Abraham, father of multitudes. I feel so bad for Ichabod. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 21, Ikavod means no glory. And it was given to him by his mom after she learned that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken, had been captured by the Philistines. And so she gave birth and she said, the glory of God has departed Israel. And that was the name of her son, Ikavod. So when we think about names and the meaning of names, how do we describe the name of eternity? It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from N.T. Wright in his book, For All God's Worth. How can you put an earthquake into a test tube or the sea into a bottle? How can you live with the terrifying thought that the hurricane has become human, that the fire has become flesh, that life itself came to life and walked in our midst? Jesus is the unnameable name. He is the Word that became flesh and dwelt among us, that He is the exact representation and the radiance of the glory of God. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3. It's not that God the Father never revealed Himself, but that Jesus perfectly portrays the picture of the Father. Consider John chapter 14, verses 8 and 9. Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long, and you still don't know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. The more we understand Jesus, the better we're going to understand the Father, and the stronger our faith is going to be. I want you to look at John chapter 8. John chapter 8, verses 31 through 35. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They answered him, we are offsprings of Abraham, have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Don't you want to be free today? Even Christians who have been set free from sin can become burdened again by their former sins, their former temptations, their former passions, and even their former anxieties. Christ alone saves, and Christ alone will set you free. Here's your challenge for the week. We have these 7 I am statements. So at the end of this video, I'm going to put those 7 I am statements on the screen along with the passages where you can find them. I want you to choose 4 of the 7 statements. And starting tonight, take one of those statements and meditate on them before bed. First, begin by reading the passage where the statement is located, and then use that statement as a theme for your prayer to God. So if we chose light of the world, we read John chapter 8, verses 12 through 30, and then we pray to God. And we thank God for sending the light of Jesus into the world. We thank God for revealing the truth and the light to us today, that we can be saved by this light. And then we'd end the prayer by asking God to help us focus on the light of truth when the world seems so dark. Rotate these 4 statements from Wednesday through Saturday and meditate on them, read those passages, pray on them, and I promise that this will be a blessed reminder of who Jesus is and why you can trust him. I hope this video has been a blessing to your Wednesday morning. Join us this time next week for our season finale of the Midweek Peak as we talk about how the battle belongs to the Lord. Until then, remember that the great I Am loves you and you can know him today.